me take you back. Let's go in the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine starts in 1975 when the world of male action figures changed. The $6 Million Man was introduced. Because prior to that, things like G.I. Joe and Big Jim were the sort of norm. Historically, male action figures only were licensed. Only. They were either a license from a cartoon or a film.
Mattel had a number of really key brands, and Barbie and Hot Wheels are two of their best, but it was very product-oriented rather than, say, brand-oriented.
The marketing people would come and say, we need these kinds of products. And we'd invent them. They'd say, yes, no, yes, no. You couldn't scratch your butt there without a research project.
Mattel would get a license and then try it, and then the film would open and close in March, and then in December they're sitting there with a bunch of inventory.
Up to that point in time, there really had never been a successful movie that had become a toy.
Someone at Mattel bought the license for Clash of the Titans, and so I started talking with the movie people and getting all the art I could and stuff, and I got the product out there 3 or 4 weeks before the movie. It was selling like crazy till the movie came out.
The myth, the magic, the mystery.
Who's buying these licenses? Who's deciding to buy Clash of the Titans and Flash Gordon? Who's doing this stuff?
For Clash of the Titans, we'd spend $500,000 for the license, $500,000 for the tooling and getting it all together, $1 million in inventory, and then you're sitting there going, well, now what am I going to do with it? Because it opened and closed in March.
So we get a call from Lucas, and they've got this thing they're working on, and they want us to show it to us. So the president says, well, when could you have product? We could probably get it tooled up and everything. We could probably get product by March. You know, the kids are going to want this for Christmas, right? What's the point? He says, pass.
Bernie Loomis, who's a Kenner, said, screw that, and he ended up doing the figures with a little piece of paper inside that says, we owe you a figure. You know, I mean, talk about balls.
5-year-olds, what do you get for Christmas? I got a coupon. Now, Ray is really upset because he's seen what happened and we missed the opportunity.
So we said, well, what can we do? We can do cowboys and Indians. Let's do Westerns. Is that popular?
Star Wars had already come out, so that was space. Military was tried and true. I'd done a lot of reading in science fiction, so I was a Frank Rosetta fan. The third one out was Barbarian.
Space, Army, and Barbarian. Then along comes Conan. They said, hey, we got a movie. They wanted to sell us the license.
My boss, a very nice guy, Shel Platt, he said, can you do some stuff, you know, like Conan stuff? I said, sure.
We took the license and we presented it to the trade. We modeled it. We made all the samples. We did all the packaging. Went through all the expense work. Then Mattel, to their horror, found that Conan was going to be an R-rated film with nudity and violence and stuff. And they said, well, you can't do a toy line based on that. They came back and claimed that we just took the license to bury it, and we didn't. We presented it. I presented it myself. I presented it to Toys R Us. I presented it to Walmart. Presented it to every account. We also presented He-Man at the same time.
Mark would sit in his office and just sketch. And he was really into comic books. One of the marketing people was passing his office. He had done this thing that it was a tall rack, the original drawing, and this guy passed by and he said, what's that? And he said, oh, it's just something I'm messing with. He said, let me take it and present it.
Then Roger and the other prelim guys, they came around and they wanted to take it and show it to Ray Wagner.
Roger Sweet was a big part of this game. He said, you know, all these male action figures, you know, that Kenner was doing, and Big Jim for that matter, they're all so wimpy. He said, why don't we do a massive figure? So he went to the product conference with this figure and they presented it to Ray.
And Roger Sweet comes out with 3 sculptures about so big.
I think he took a big gym and he used clay to buff it up. I think he had a tank that was like a hat with a gun.
And another guy had his whole head look like a bullet. And the third guy had a face and a bearskin cape. And he called this one Tank Head. And he called this one Bullet Head. And he called this one He-Man. And we said, He-Man.
Here's the man, here's the hero, here's the template. You notice his feet are not straight ahead like action figures were at that time. He has his weapon, he's ready to whack you one. And this is more comic book, but done in 3D. That's what's important about He-Man. That's how we took a nip out of Kenner's business, because Kenner was killing us. And how we did it was by bringing this kind of action to the figure. If you have a good guy, you measure the good guy by the bad guy. And this is Skeletor.
I said, well, He-Man's the hero. He's the good guy. So he's He-Man. So I said, well, we'll have other mans. Sea-Man, which we had to change. We had Man-at-Arms, man on the front side. And the bad guys, I had D-Man, like Demon, became Skeletor later on. The girl that we had, we called it Woe-Man, and it became Tila. All the first names I came up with were really dorky, like Woe-Man, come on. But it was keeping with my man theme.
And also there was female members of our brand group, and they would come in and say, no.
And once we got comic book writers and stuff working on it, they came up with a lot better names. They're the ones that came up with Merman. I'm going, oh, Merman, thank you. That's genius, because I couldn't stick with Seaman for long.
Mark was very energized about creating a new scale of product.
Most of the figures were like this. Now we have a much bulkier figure. But that's getting a visual shelf presence and a signature that you can stick to.
Something that was just a little more maneuverable, with moving arms and legs so they could strike power positions and, over-the-top muscles, and nobody had done that yet. And of course, we were all influenced by Conan and Frank Frazetta and that whole genre.
They never did a figure in 3D that would be correct proportions. They would try to do the figure so they could take pieces of it and turn it into tooling directly and not have to resculpt it. So Tony came up with the idea. He said, I'll sculpt the whole thing 1-to-1 as it should look with no articulation. And let's take a look at what that looks like and put it next to the vehicles. And when you do the castle, put it next to the castle. In effect, he was talking about doing a really nice 3D study. By doing those, we could take them to child test, and we could test them when they look good.
And that's where we saw these little kids going, you do this because I tell you to do it. Exactly the words their mother was saying. So they wanted the power. So that's where the power theme came up.
They want to have the power to do whatever they want to do without being told by mom or dad or someone else. So we just said, I have the power.
When they took the figures out, these kids just went bats. They just went crazy. Oh, look. I didn't realize what was going on. These kids went nuts. And then the kids start trying to steal He-Man and Skeletor and Tila, because Tila was sculpted like she was really a babe. Tony got carried away, and the little boys liked that.
Then, especially in dolls, it's the little stuff. The little stuff actually gives a lot of play value. So if you look at every one of the male action figure lines that we did in He-Man, they all have swords and axes and stuff like that. We picked this up from the girls, Barbie, and all that stuff in terms of the value. So there's always a little packet in the He-Man thing.
Then I came up with a couple of vehicles, which they were good enough to let Ted help me. And Ted is a real industrial designer. he can work out all the engineering and everything as he goes. I was originally trained before design school as an engineer and in technical illustration. I'd do a sketch like this, I'd discuss it with Mark, and you see, he'd say, you know, like, we need a cannon, so I'd add the cannon here. And then it would evolve, and you'll see here, this was the final sketch that was presented. This was one of the prelim things of the Wind Raider, a different design. It was Mark's idea to have this futuristic and yet something from yesteryear that had technicality, you know, with all the details and mechanical things happening.
Oh, wait a minute, we don't have a storyline, we don't have a film, so we need a diorama, we need a setting. So, bango, it's Castle Grayskull. Well, Castle Grayskull, my favorite toy growing up was the Guns N' Navarone playset, which was sort of a half shell of a mountain, and they had like layers in the inside. And I'm going, do Guns N' Navarone playset, you know?
I'd already drawn the castle from the very beginning, because when you do the world, you got to show where his fort is. So I gave it to a sculptor, and it was like an architect did it. It was all straight. And see, I wanted it to be organic, like it was coming to life. And so they tried another sculptor, then they tried another one, and about that time I said, forget it, just forget it. And I went back and took some clay and sculpted Castle Grayskull myself.
And Mark Ellis comes in and says, well, this won't work. I said, why not? He forgot how tall the action figures were, and the door on the Grayskull was like an inch shorter than He-Man. I said, yeah, Mark, you got to resculpt the door. It needs to be big enough to let He-Man go in. And then other than that, he did it. And Glenn Hastings, by the way, said, that's $20. $20 at retail. No one's going to buy that.
We really couldn't do a whole bunch of blocks. We had to make that part of the mold. So we wanted the overspray to not only emphasize the drawbridge, but to show that it was textured all the way.
The manufacturing people did everything with paint masks. All the painting had to be exactly the same. And I went out to the factory, because that was my background. I said, no. Just give me a spray can. I said, it's like the guy's painting the fence outside with graffiti. Just line it up and go, spray up. And I said, and then I did a different one. I went like this. Then I did one that went like this. I said, do Zorro if you want. I don't care. And so every castle was different.
Except they wouldn't let me do an interior because they didn't want the price to go up. So Rebecca did the labels that glue on the interior. I did the artwork. She turned them into labels. And that became the interior of the castle.
We have a character here. The main character is He-Man. And this is way more Skeletor than it is He-Man. Well, why don't we make it so it belongs to whoever has the power of Grayskull? And that's where I think the divided sword, and when you've got the two pieces, you own the castle. It doesn't belong to Skeletor and it doesn't belong to He-Man.
We did it so the bad guy had half and the good guy had half, and you try to get them both together, and together you could open the door on Castle Grayskull.
It's the seat of power, okay? And you don't know if it's a good place or a bad place. And it's kind of always in the background. And it has that light side, dark side, and that appeals to little boys. It's just one of those things, you know, they're looking to, got to be a little dangerous.
He-Man's sculpture was going to be the basic sculpture for everybody, except for Ram-Man. Ram-Man was a big, heavy-set guy. Even the evil characters used the same legs, the same arms, the same torso.
We ran out of tooling dollars easily as we were developing this thing. So we're saying, we need another vehicle, but, you know, we got to go find something for nothing. This cat was part of the big gym line. And all we did was paint it green and then put the hood on it. And so the tooling was this.
They had the little 5.5-inch He-Man guy all in wax sitting there. And they put the tiger down. I said, this doesn't work. It's out of scale. I said, I don't care if you paint it green and give it orange stripes. I don't care. We're going to have the tiger because it saved us a whole tooling bill. So they said, well, we'll show you. So they painted it green and gave it orange stripes. And they come back, see? See? And I said, wow, that looks great. And they go, oh, no. And they said, well, it still won't work. It's as big as a horse. Paul compared it. Look at He-Man. It's as big as a horse. Put a saddle on it. And that's how we came up with the battle cat that He-Man would ride. And it's not as romantic as people would like it to be. But sometimes you back into these things.
Beautiful fantasy and monsters and dragons all mixed together, and it's just great for a little boy when you have 5 or 6 years old and you find this character with all, you know, in this world where imagination is beyond dream. It's just amazing.
Back then, the way packaging worked is we would create the names of the brands, the names of the toys, the graphics that went with it, all the packaging, everything about the retail presentation would come out of the packaging group. I had designed a logo called Lords of Power first, and that was a name that they seemed to favor.
Our president, Glenn Hastings, said, no, you're not doing Power Lords. He thought that had a religious connotation.
Some executive high up said, let's call it Masters of the Universe.
And I said, oh, let's go right to the heart of this thing. There's a guy who paints exactly like this line looks.
Because Frank Frazetta was at that time kind of a new thing, and there were posters all over the place.
It'd probably be something that's glazes and oil, so it has this kind of luminescence, do great things with light. And Rudy Obrero came in.
So he said, hey, I got this project, can you paint like Frazetta? And I go, man, I can paint like anybody.
I said, let's give it a try. Do one as fast as you can. He went and did a Battle Cat.
I felt like I shouldn't rip off Frazetta completely because, you know, jeez, man, I don't want to insult the man. I'm not that good.
I mean, he just had such an emotional cue in his work, and we were trying to get that too. Not just, you know, big muscles and fur and all that stuff, barbarian stuff. It was the emotion of the light and his paint.
I remember I was 5 years old. We were walking into a toy store, and on the top shelf there was the Castle Grayskull box. You're transported into this world just by looking. The art is amazing. It's really capturing your attention. You just look at the box and you already have a scenario to play with your figures. The development of the advertising was going to be really the key because we didn't have a television show. We weren't even thinking about it at the time. And I wanted to do a slice of life.
He-Man, He-Man. Who's the big guy with the muscles?
He's He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe. Skeletor is his enemy.
He-Man, He-Man. Here's He-Man, Skeletor, and Castle Grayskull. You have to put the castle together. You're doomed, He-Man.
Oh, yeah? Watch this action, Dad.
He-Man.
Now I have the power.
He-Man and Skeletor each sold separately. Castle Grayskull also sold separately from the Masters of the Universe collection from Mattel.
And we brought the major retailers into Hawthorne and showed them the line.
I remember it being in like a brand review or a sales meeting or something, and somebody said, well, how are you going to tell the story?
So he said, well, what program have you developed that's a tie-in with somebody else, another company, that I know is going to happen, that isn't just your advertising, which I know you cut back on. So what do you got?
And Mark spouts out, he says, oh, didn't we tell you? We're going to put a mini comic book in with every toy.
We had these original 4 mini comics that came out with the toys that were written by Don Glut and drawn by Alfredo Alcala. And they're beautiful. But you could tell when you look at them that the world had not been defined. It was very barbarian. It was very crude and dark. That was done. A lot of people say Frank Frazetta-esque.
Up until then, I'd written a backstory, and He-Man came out of the jungle like Jungle Book. He was a little boy raised in the jungle by apes. They changed it to be more fantasy, Eternia, and all this stuff, which was way better.
You could tell after that they were starting to create a voice for it, like it define the world more, kind of get these character interactions done rather than just bad guy, good guy, smash them up kind of thing.
You know, other writers in the mini comics brought more stuff, and the tighter mini comics that came out in 86, 87 that Tim Kilpin worked on and Bruce Timm drew, and Stan Saaki lettered. I mean, you had these amazing talents working on these mini comics.
And so you had DC took over producing the comics.
I said, hey, I want to buy 10 pages of advertising, full rate card. Well, nobody's done that in the history of mankind. And I said, oh, a small little catch. You need to develop a line on my figure. And so we ended up doing the deal for a mini line, which came out at DC 47. And that was Superman versus He-Man.
So what they did was they produced a 3-issue miniseries, a full-size, regular, modern comic-sized issues. And at the same time, they were producing a series of mini-comics that also had gone on to define the world a little bit more. You know, you had the Tale of Tila and the PowerPoint Dread, now the King and Queen and He-Man. He was more well-spoken and articulate, and he knew who the characters were and what they did. And in the DC miniseries in particular, that's when we really saw Prince Adam starting to come out and be defined.
When I found out that there were going to be mini comic books behind the toys, you know, it's like, oh, okay, I had to approach it a little bit differently than working in the regular comic books. I knew that there are certain ways you could tell a story, even if the book is about this big. Actually, you know, about this big. I just decided that I wanted to try and expand the world of He-Man so they could, people and the kids could see that it was like it inclusive of all different races, and so different people buying the toys could see themselves in the books.
I got my first Masters toys on my 4th birthday, and it was just love at first sight. They were full of muscles, they were colorful, and you instantly knew who the bad guy was and who the good guy was. It was like Star Wars, Darth Vader, the moment he shows up, you know that's the bad guy.
It's like, right, we've got an army of goodies, an army of baddies, because we want to make more toys. And that's where that comes up, and you build on these, and it becomes more and more colourful, and as a kid watching, you become more and more invested, and I must buy that, I must own this, and the adventures become bigger and bigger and bigger until...
It is true that my dad is the cornerstone of Saturday morning cartoons. He and Fred Silverman got them started in 1965 with the first program that was ever specifically bought for Saturday morning, which was Superman. And it sort of changed the whole dynamics of Saturday morning.
In the 60s, there was a regulation passed regulating children's advertising. I think they had a show called the Linus the Lionhearted Show. And then Linus was on boxes of alphabets.
I get my strength from new post-card of oats.
Reagan and the Supreme Court had the reversal of decision in like 81. Before that, a toy company could not make a half an hour, what was essentially a TV commercial for their toys, because it was considered a commercial. And that changed in 1981.
This all came about roughly 3 years ago when the Federal Communications Commission reversed itself on some policy guidelines in children's programming. Set in effect the marketplace, not the federal government, that best determine what is suitable for youngsters to watch.
In late 1982, Mattel approached Filmation and said, we've got this playset called Castle Grace that we'd like to advertise. So Filmation were like, we'll animate this commercial for you.
This toy comes with something that can really open up a kid's imagination. Its own legend.
He-Man! Skeletor is his enemy.
It's the Masters of the Universe collection. And for my kids, the legend begins here. With Castle Grayskull.
Gwen Wetzler, one of the directors of the Flash Gordon cartoon, would later direct He-Man and She-Ra. She set up a team of ex-Disney animators. They sat down, they had the action figures, they had He-Man, Beastman, Man-at-Arms, Skeletor, Tila, Merman, and Castle Grayskull. Maybe just probably knowing just photos of the characters.
I did the promo, I produced and directed the promo that sold the series, and we did full animation. We had like 2 weeks to do it. I mean, we were just flying, and it sold the show.
He-Man's forces, but leave him to me. Here I am, Skeletor.
He-Man! Skeletor is getting away!
But Castle Grayskull is safe with us. Nothing's safe while Skeletor is out there.
And so the legend continues in this Masters of the Universe collection. And in the imagination of my kids. Look for it. It's new. From Mattel.
And then my dad's like, wait a minute, this could be a great show. He was a major Conan Barbarian fan. We could do something with this.
I remember I was sitting there one day and working on these different ideas that I was trying to do for, to kind of get something going there. And I remember somebody came into the office, and he comes in, he puts in a box, about like that, comes in, it was full of these action figures and vehicles from Mattel. He goes, okay guys, this is the next show we're gonna do.
My first week there, I turned to the storyboard artist next to me, a guy named Don Manuel, and I said, Don, the name of this show is He-Man, right? That's like a temp title. Like the real name's going to be like Ragnar or Karnak or Torok. And he goes, no, it's really He-Man.
When you first heard the name, it was so macho and so male chauvinistic. I said, no, you could never, that would never work. I said, it's awful. Every little girl in the audience is going to turn that down.
Because it was a syndicated show, he said, you know what? We need this to work for 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, kids come home from school. It's got to be at least 13 original weeks. And that adds up to 65 half hours. And that adds up to working year-round for all the animators and all the people at Filmation.
And the Masters of the Universe. I am Adam, Prince of Eternia and defender of the secrets of Castle Grayskull. This is Cringer, my fearless friend. Fabulous secret powers were revealed to me the day I held aloft my magic sword and said, by the power of Grayskull!
They had come out with a series of mini-comics when they began to market the toys. And each of the comics, unfortunately, had a different storyline. Different way of how did He-Man become He-Man.
Creating a Bible for a show, it contains all the rules of the show, the background of the characters, whose parents, what their powers are, what their abilities are, how they relate to each other. It's a telephone book containing all the characters.
The initial idea was to write the Bible for the TV series, which would also be used as a Bible for marketing the toy.
They didn't have a concept. They had a bunch of characters designed, guys with muscles that are going to come ripping out of the forest and wreak havoc someplace. I told them we would be interested in doing it if we had total creative control.
So I began to create a story and create a universe around it. And I came up with the idea of the planet of Eternia. And there has to be some kind of an arc to the story and an underpinning for the story so that they understand what the subtext is, even if they don't quite get it, because that's what's going to drive viewers.
I sort of figured a way to write above their level and at their level at the same time, which makes the stories kind of have some lasting shelf value.
I watched them for the first time as a goof just to see what it was, but then I saw that someone had really sat down and worked out the mythos and the history and where these characters came from. They had the rules worked out of how the powers worked and how they didn't work. A lot of thought had gone into it. That to me was appealing because science fiction and fantasy, it's not whatever you want to do. There have to be rules.
In animation, you break down the shots, two-shot, close-up. You actually direct as you write, which is how people think you write regular screenplays and teleplays, but in fact, it's only how you write animation.
These are two of the earliest drawings that were ever done of He-Man. When we were trying to design the character, because he was a toy. This is at the very beginning of the series.
The script would be written, and then the storyboard people would basically visualize the script and would create just like little comic. Then it goes to a phase called layout.
And see, this is how we would work. We would draw the character in blue pencil. That's something that we routinely do in animation. We use blue pencil extensively. And I would do this in layout. I would show He-Man struggling against that vine, and then pop. See that? He bursts free. And the reason why you don't see anything over here is because this was a held cell.
Then it would go to the animator, and the track had already been recorded, and the track was called Red. When you look at an old movie film, and you'd see there's a strip of celluloid with these little button squares. Well, each square is one photograph. A sheet like this, each one of these little lines is one of those squares. This much here, this is 1 second. And I'd just be thinking action. I'd not be worried about, all the details yet. The other thing with heroes never have spaces in the teeth. Heroes always, this is always solid. Villains have spaces in the teeth. I don't know why. So that would be like one key frame, and then you would do another one. So you see, keyframes is 1 and 9, and then this is the middle. You know, it's called a breakdown drawing because it defines the art of motion. So this is sort of like your middle between these two here.
And one of the dirty secrets that comes out now, but Disney would never admit to, is they did a lot of rotoscoping.
This rotoscope was an early form of motion capture where you filmed an actor against black, whatever. They made photostats of live action frames, and then the animator would draw the character on top. So it's based on the movement of the human being.
They got a muscle guy, a woman, some other characters, and they dressed them up in costume, and they shot the black and white footage of it for stock scenes, which there were like He-Man runs in, stops, looks around, runs off this way, runs off that way. They were action scenes more than dialogue scenes.
He-Man had his sword and he does this, he goes, like that. Stock 16 was the laugh. That's the one that goes, There was a wonderful old assistant animator named Jim Logan who had worked for Fleischer and Famous Studios when they're doing Popeyes and all. And he could never remember the names of the He-Man characters. So he made up his own name. So there would be He-Man, and then Skeletor he would call Bone Man, and Beastman he called Dog Man, and Merman was Fish Man. So I go over to him to talk to him about a scene. He goes, "Oh, I got this scene here of Bone Man, and Bone Man is talking to Fish Man, and then Fish Man and Bone Man get together with Dog Man." And I said, "Jim, that's a great show. I want to work on that show." I'm like, we should develop that. I like it.
Gwen Wetzel was a really good director, and part of it was she had a really good eye for cinematics, and she really liked what she was doing. It wasn't just a job, and part of that was her, and part of it was probably trying to prove that a woman should be a director, because back then it was a boys' club.
Lou was very progressive. The other directors and some of the animators and the men did not like the idea of working with a woman. Well, one of the other directors just came in and threw his work on my desk and refused to work with me.
If you were a woman, even if you drew like Michelangelo, they still would give you a minor role. And Gwen was one of those people who went against that, and fought for women to have more important roles. So she was an animator and a story writer and a very good director.
My dad was a very moral, upstanding fellow. He did care about his audience. Even before the messages and that whole thing sort of took such center stage, he still made sure there wasn't too much violence. It was action in the cartoons.
When they announced they were doing the show, Peggy Charon of Action for Children's Television was up in arms just because of the title.
Peggy Charon has been the American voice of the kids' TV wilderness ever since she founded Action for Children's Television back in 1968. But the group has had few successes recently. For if the 1970s belonged to the watchdogs like Peggy Charon, the 1980s have belonged to those American He-Man.
We did 130 episodes of Skeletor losing. It got to be a little difficult to figure out how to make him lose without killing him. Violence, more violence on the streets than there is on television.
There was a scene in one of Michael's scripts where he had He-Man uprooting a tree, and the editors wrote, "Please do not portray He-Man uprooting a tree. Small children will be moved to emulate."
I mean, you couldn't have a character look cross and another character look, like grimace at them. That was considered a violent act, and you could have no violent act. So here comes this guy named He-Man, and he looks like Conan, and Conan is really violent. Everybody thinks it's going to be really, really violent. They brought in, once again, as they had been doing since the 70s, the educational consultant who made sure everything was pro-social, and they had the tags at the end, which I never wrote one of those. That's staff writer. It might have been Arthur Nadell or Paul Dini or one of the guys on staff who cooked up those. Today, Adam learned a valuable lesson about not being a dork.
He would do a story about monsters fighting each other and having at the end, always look both ways crossing the street. Come on. It was just a sop to the consultants because He-Man at that time was being pilloried for being one of the most violent shows on television, even though it was not.
Because as you saw in today's episode, no matter how big the problem, one person or one living creature can make a big difference. See you next time.
This right here is the first original character that was ever designed for the series. And this was a guy called Lizard Man, and he appeared in an episode called She-Demon of Phantos.
Well, we better think of something fast. They know we're here now.
My dad's favorite character right there is Orko. And absolutely was one of the best characters and his beloved. And I really think it says the most about him. He really was kind of Orko in his own way.
If there's one thing better than being a great magician, it's being alive and having great friends like you. And I'm going to make the most of it.
Okay, that's Skeletor. That's probably the first production drawing that was ever done of Skeletor right there.
When I think of Skeletor, he's one of the most interesting villains, I think, to this day. As in the first few episodes of He-Man, he's a dark villain. There's no humor or anything. Then halfway through the first season, they realise, hang on a sec, if we play Skeletor for laughs, this is quite good.
Yeah, you rolling?
Rolling.
The laugh came because villainous laughs usually or sneering, you know? But I gave it a comedic laugh. I chose to talk to myself. The reason being, I wanted to keep the flow. So if I said it one way, I wanted the answer to come. So I would do, let's say, Skeletor and Merman, and the Merman, get out of my face. Don't tell me what to do.
I was very fortunate because I got to direct the second season of He-Man. So I got to work with all those actors. And John Irwin, He-Man, really, really lovely, lovely man. He did his work, he was prepared, he got his lines, he really cared, and then he sort of disappeared.
For 2 years, I've tried. I said, if you came out, the line would be around the block between he and I. He just won't. He thinks about it. It's like, oh, no, you know, I'm not He-Man. I said, no shit. And I'm not Skeletor, so what?
The enigma about John Irwin is he's just an incredibly shy guy. You know, put him behind a microphone, you know, off camera, he works great.
We had a premiere at the Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard at 11 o'clock in the morning or some outrageous time. Black tie, blocked off 2 blocks, had the He-Man hot air balloon, sci-fi vehicles that we rented from prop lots and stuff. And the premiere was great. I bussed in kids from all over LA County, and we used all the theaters, not just one. And Lou strung together 3 episodes to make like a 90-minute movie. And the kids loved it. They loved it.
And we're just going, who never would have thought of this in a billion years. That was pretty spectacular.
We were in the business of making things out of plastic, man. It was just another thing we were making. All of a sudden, all the stuff that we created became live.
The world they created and the characters within it and the colour and the adventure, it went from playing just, you know, oh, take that, baddie, goodie, and then you're suddenly creating these events. I still got cassette tapes, which I recorded. I recorded myself singing a soundtrack to it. So me going, then I played that on a separate recorder while I was playing with the figure, so I had my own soundtrack to it.
By the power of Grayskull. Let's go, Dotgun. I've got a city to save.
So there was something in that show that was more than just the moment. There was more to the character than that. But what was timely about it was hitting at exactly the moment to break open a whole new market, but to transform television and created an opportunity for all kinds of shows.
I think Lou Scheimer doesn't get enough credit for what he did for He-Man, because I think the brand was Mattel, and I think they're fine. But Filmation's cartoon came along and gave it like an injection of life and gave it a world, and suddenly the kids are like, oh my goodness, and I have the power became a catchphrase. And suddenly He-Man became, you know, this billion-dollar empire.
The impact was huge. All the kids were raising the sword in by the power of Grayskull. When you have a very successful brand, of course, they're going to spread with this kind of items, and there's tons and tons of Much collectibles available were available back in the day. So it's a mix of a little bit of everything. So the impact, I think, left a huge mark in the toy and the cartoon world, and especially for the people of this generation. We had the television business after us to do more stuff. So here, let's take our success with the He-Man television show and do a girls' version television show, because we can sell it.
We just decided, well, if we're going to do a female fashion action doll, she might as well ride on the coattails of the popularity and the awareness of this huge iconic brand called He-Man.
These are the character designs. They wanted a feminine lead for He-Man, and so I did a couple of these. They eventually took this off and spun it off onto the She-Ra thing. It was given to Justine Dancer, I think. It's just a feminine lead for He-Man.
I was doing freelance for a lot of people at this time, but I wanted to change, and I went to work at Kenner Prelim, working on Strawberry Shortcake, working on Glamour Gals, established lines that they had when I came in. But I also created a superpower small doll girl. Didn't know what to call her. I called her Nova, I called her Andromeda.
So we came up with the concept of a female fashion action doll, which would compete with Barbie, but not really expecting it to stay in the marketplace long term. I'm sure it's surprising to everybody that we would produce a doll line in order to feed the main brand, which was Barbie.
When Mattel interviewed me, they said, we noticed that Tila is selling well in Masters. We're thinking about doing a small doll line like this. We want you to do it.
I think one of the biggest challenges is, what are we going to call her? She had so many different names. We tested Leela, then we looked at the name Sheila, because we wanted a female, some kind of pronoun in there. You know, Hera, we looked at Hera, and people thought, oh, that's going to sound like Hera in a commercial, so we can't use that.
She was not named She-Ra, nothing. It was no name, no nothing. So when those drawings went through, got all the approvals and the commitment for more money, they came to me and they said, now do what you want. We trust what you've done. Now do more. Do what you want. And she doesn't have to look like Tila anymore.
So I said, well, wait a minute. No, maybe I got something good going. He's he, so she's she. So that'll work. And Ra is a god, Egyptian word for God. You know, He-Man is like a gigantic god, you know, with big, big muscles.
So we created She-Ra, or Princess Adora, who, you know, was He-Man's twin sister. Surprise! Look what I found in the forest.
There was more to She-Ra being just a female version. One of the important things was to respect and show what is female. It wasn't just aping He-Man. We gave her different powers that were more reflective of female sides. I don't want to get into like saying, oh, well, these are boys' traits and those are girls' traits. And we didn't want to pigeonhole, but we wanted to showcase what is more inherently a girl kind of thing.
She should present a feeling of strength, not a feeling of high-heeled, can't hardly move, slimness. And that became a point of discussion in several meetings. And even exclamation where the men would say, oh my God, look at those legs, when I would show drawings. There were times when I was very, very disgusted hearing about men's opinions about women's bodies ad infinitum.
So making her a little more fuller-lipped, more open eyes, giving her stronger facial features. And it was hard to get to that. We would do tear sheets of different actresses and models and give those to the sculptors and say, let's go this way. Didn't look like a fashion model or a runway model. She had to look strong in the face.
That she was powerful, that she had the capacity to take care of herself.
I don't know how well
most men know most women. I know that there are some men who find women rather mysterious. Many male fantasy writers, they know they should have a woman in the story, but they're not quite sure how she interacts with the others. And sometimes I have the feeling that their knowledge of how to write a woman character comes from reading other male fantasy writers or watching movies.
The problem that we ran into was that in the aftermath of the public approbation against the violence of He-Man, the consultants really came after us hard on She-Ra, to the point where they said, if she's a female character, should not be fighting. A female character should not be using a sword. The male characters, like Bo, they could use swords, they could fire things, they hit people. But She-Ra, they said, rather than punching someone, she would do a ballet-style kick, and almost by accident, hit somebody. And she never used a sword to hurt someone. And it was all latent misogyny and sexism, that we cannot have a female character acting in this strong fashion, which really bristled me and Larry a lot, because we had been charged with developing the show. I mean, the two of us wrote the Bible for She-Ra, created the characters, and we wanted this to be a really strong female character. And we felt hobbled by the toy company and by the psychologists.
When She-Ra came on, what was exciting because the artwork had picked up in quality. Like towards the end of He-Man, we were getting really good animators. We're starting to come in and really good assistants. The background crew was great, and we were getting good board artists. And so the quality was exciting because, hey, this is looking far better than you ever would have thought anything like this would look.
I'm looking for Lookie. He's hiding. You know, Lookie's hiding again.
I mean, I was stuck hiding Lookie in the She-Ra shows, and that was my job. I had to do that on top of everything else. I really hated that little guy after that. It's like, God, what am I going to put him in the show now? You know,
Lookie was my favorite. He was even to this day, Lookie is, I would say, my favorite character that I ever designed. This is Hordak from Development Artwork, where we're first coming up with the design for the character for She-Ra, and this is Cowl, and that's Bo. My version of it. Cowl originally did not have his wings coming out of his ear. He was an owl with butterfly wings. Here we go. There he is. There's Lookie. There's Lookie. That's him. That's the original rotation of Lookie.
Hi, it's me again, Lookie. Did you find where I was hiding today? If not, try again. Can you see me? Here I am.
there was a scene where this sweet bee, she had some kind of French accent or something, is telling He-Man how great he is, and I staged, this wasn't in the script, I staged Frost in back here, and she's going, you know, and that was totally me putting that in. So I don't want to say it's subversive, because, I mean, come on, it's a kid's got to do nothing subversive particularly, but it was that kind of thing, like, what can we do with this? How can I really push this a bit?
Her stronger episodes were, I'd say, stronger than He-Man's. You know, an episode where the Horde are burning books.
One day you will thank the Horde for ridding you of these lies. Burn the books.
It's very like, you know, well, that's pretty serious. That's the days of the Third Reich kind of thing. That's pretty serious. Or like The Price of Freedom, where the baddies win.
Camaraderie of the She-Ra universe was about fighting a war, which brings you together, creates different kinds of friendships, a more varied kind of bunch of characters, versus the He-Man story, which was more of a family operation. He was a king, he was a queen, he was a prince, and they dealt with those sort of stories, while he would often dealt with the occasional bad guy, versus we're all in this together to fight this guy.
The boys liked it too, you know. I was surprised by that. They enjoyed it. I think they learned to I think with She-Ra we learned to bring men and women like closer together in what they liked about fantasy world.
I loved She-Ra. I think I loved the She-Ra show more than the He-Man show. I found the stories more sophisticated. I even stole my sister's She-Ra. She got 2 She-Ras for her birthday, like 2 years later. And so since she had 2, I was like, well, I'll just take that one.
Once he threatened Eternia. Now Hordak and the Horde menace Etheria, and She-Ra must stop them. Joining She-Ra in her heroic struggles are Swiftwind, Bo, Glimmer, Queen Angela, Madame Razz, and Broom. And even He-Man will lend his awesome strength when the Horde threatens Etherea's rebels.
Team up with He-Man weekdays at 3 and She-Ra at 3:30 beginning Monday on Channel 13's Power Hour.